Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Celluloid Zeroes podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike Carlin. With me, of course, is brother Jimmy. Say hi, Jimmy.
Hello. Hello.
We're at episode 10, and we're doing a movie that you picked, Jim.
Mike, it's Celluloid 10.
It's oh, look at you. I mean, you really should be the creative director of this enterprise.
Oh, stop. No.
We are talking about 1988's Action Jackson. Now, clearly a movie that had the title first before the plot, right? Title before the plot. But you know, for those of you who have never seen Action Jackson, and we're going to imagine that there are many of you who haven't seen Action Jackson, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what this movie's about, and then we're going to talk about it. We'll talk about it. So here we go. So,
oh, God.
By the way, starring Carl Weathers, Apollo Creed, Dylan from Predator.
Love him.
Great. He's fantastic.
Yeah.
This movie may not have been the best vehicle for his talents, but let's give the fans, the people, a little bit of an overview here. So, due to the excessive use of force in arresting a sexual predator, Detective Lieutenant Jericho Action Jackson, played by Carl Weathers, is demoted to police sergeant. And what's worse, the father of the man he roughed up, Detroit industrialist Peter Dellaplane, played by Crazy Nelson, who I'm guessing his Poltergeist money had run out at this point. So Detroit industrialist Peter Dellaplane declares war on Jackson, framing him for the murder of his own wife, Patrice, played by the lovely Sharon Stone. But Jericho manages to elude arrest, and with the help of a drug-addicted singer named Sydney, who's played by Vanity, goes after Dellaplane. And that's pretty much all there is to say about this movie. I will point out, Jim, that this is the second movie we've done where a former stuntman was the director.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So the first being Megaforce.
Yeah.
And pretty much, maybe not as shitty of a movie as Megaforce. This had some kind of a plot to it, but well, where do you want to start off with this one, Jim? I mean, do you have an observation you just want to kind of lob at me here?
Yeah. I'll tell you, I have a lot of. I know this is like all of our movies. We don't even have to editorialize about how horrible the film was. The dialogue was campy. There were so many stereotypes on display, all of that stuff. And we're going to get into kind of the blaxploitation element of it later. But at the outset, Mike, I will just tell you something. I have a lot of fond memories of this movie. It's 1988. I'm either an 8th grader or a freshman in high school, depending on the calendar. And I was a bit of a late bloomer, so I was still very much into the hero worship thing, the action star. I wanted to be the hero and the action star. I'm taking the taekwondo. I'm watching the action movies. I was a late bloomer. You were already like doodling in the basement, but I was very much kind of in that realm, in that mode. And this movie was a good example of a movie that I would have liked, that I would have seen, that I would have gotten caught up in, as bad as it was. I was a huge Carl Weathers fan, loved him obviously in the Rocky movies, thought he was a very important part of that saga of films, at least up until I guess Rocky IV, when his character was written off. So I always loved Carl Weathers, and I loved action movies, and I loved martial arts, and this kind of had all of those elements wrapped up in it.
I agree. I mean, I think I'm watching this movie, and now at the time, I had never actually seen this movie, and I avoided it because our brother-in-law Paul talked so bad about it. I think he walked out. I can't remember if he and Greg, our brother Greg, actually walked out of the movie theater when they saw this movie. But and Paul, movie lover that he is, would never walk out of a movie, but unless it was really bad. I'm watching this movie for the first time last week, And I'm thinking to myself, it brought me back to a period of time in my life that I enjoyed. It was fun. It was, a hell of a lot more carefree in 1988 than it is in 2020. That's for damn sure. I mean, we're talking what, 32 years ago?
Yeah.
No kids, no wife, no mortgage. You know, it was it's a fun movie to watch. And as I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, this movie isn't that bad. If I were Pontius Pilate, I might say I find nothing wrong with this film, except as the movie goes on, you realize it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It's got a lot of great fun one-liners, 80s tropes. But the movie as a whole, like if you actually read the script, it really wouldn't make much sense. Like why are they putting him at this Detroit Businessman of the Year against somebody whose son he almost killed? Like why would you put Action Jackson in, all because the other guy's wife had her Parcheesi night? Like who? How does that happen? I don't know. So it's a fun movie to watch. It's not a great movie when you think about like why things are happening.
You know what it is, Mike? A little bit, just to use a stupid metaphor, I guess. It's a donut. You start getting into the film and it's fun and it captures your attention. There's a lot of fireworks and action, and he does a somersault over a car, this kind of thing.
The taxi cab.
Yeah. But then once you get to the center, it's just like a hole. There's nothing there. There's no plot that you can really make any sense of. It's just like a bunch of outrageous stunts and kind of macho dialogue, cop stereotypes. I mean, he's a cop without a gun. So this is Detroit, which, was no better 35 years ago than it is today. I mean, Detroit is just it's a shit show. It's terrible. So he's a police lieutenant. He gets demoted as a result of excessive use of force for breaking the arm of a white guy, I think, was what happened, because it was a sexual predator. And because of that, he is still allowed to be a sergeant in the police force, but a detective sergeant, but he loses access to a firearm, and he's in the office. I don't know. He's in the office talking all day on the phone. I'm not sure what he's doing.
He's a pencil pusher, right? Yeah. Like his character in Predator. Looks like you've been pushing too many pencils. I don't know what kind of accent that was, actually. Certainly wasn't Schwarzenegger Gary. But I find like so I think Carl Weathers, he may have had something to do with the writing of the film. I think he came up, if I'm remembering correctly, he may have come up with the title.
Yeah.
Action Jackson. But I did a little research, Jim, and Action Jackson was also the name of an action figure from the late 60s, early 70s.
Good God.
So I'm wondering if Carl Weathers had one of these little jammies. So
was the action figure African American?
It was multi-ethnic. So they had both Caucasian as well as African American varieties. So here, just take a look at this, Jim.
Action Jackson is my name. Bold adventure is my game. Think of what you'd want to be, then call on me.
I want to be a frogman.
Action Jackson. Action Jackson.
Yeah, I'd want one of these action figures.
Oh, and then there's White Australian.
There's like a Chuck Norris looking guy.
Yeah. He wants to be a firefighter. Wow.
Yeah, so you have these action figures. Let me just say this.
Oh, there's the black karate. Yeah.
Well, there's he went up against Peter Dellaplane later on.
Yeah.
But I think it's possible that this movie was actually inspired by a lot of action figures. And actually, if you look at those dolls, they're very reminiscent. You and I, when we were kids, I remember in kindergarten we had these Star Trek dolls, like these inch Star Trek dolls.
Yep.
I believe made by the same company.
Certainly a uncanny resemblance.
Yeah.
No doubt.
So Action Jackson could have been this this doll, right? This GI Joe kind of doll. But he's in this movie. He is a former athlete, track star, maybe. Because and I get that because he was basically running at pace with a moving taxi cab.
Yeah.
And then he leaps over it, of course. But he's also, not just a cop, not just a former athlete. He's a Harvard-educated lawyer.
Yeah.
Who settles for working in the Detroit Police Department. Now, you're a lawyer, Jim. Does that make any sense whatsoever?
I'll say this about it. First of all, just from an acting casting perspective, can Carl Weathers play a Harvard-educated lawyer turned cop? Yes. Carl Weathers can do that. Carl Weathers is a classy, gentlemanly figure in my estimation. He's funny. He's been in some comedies in his career. He's a former professional athlete himself. He was a football player. I don't remember if he played in the NFL or the Canadian Football League, but he's just a real talented athlete and a fairly convincing actor. I have to tell you, Mike, can we hold on for 1 sec?
Yeah. Yeah. So you were talking, Jim, about Carl Weathers and the casting choice to put Carl Weathers in here, and could he play a Harvard-educated lawyer who turns cop?
Yeah, and he clearly can. Now, whether that demographic of police officer exists, an African-American Harvard lawyer who forgoes, a high salary, prestigious position to be a police officer, I really would have no idea that that's possible. But I think the point is that the hero in this film, the chief protagonist in this film, is an African-American male who's highly accomplished, very intelligent. And actually, Mike, I think at one point there's a scene where he's walking into a dinner party for Dellaplane, and I have no idea how he got to the Man of the Year award dinner. And he's having a constitutional law type discussion with another patron who's a crusty, white shoe man, like a paper chase guy. And he's having this conversation with him, and they're arguing the merits of their positions back and forth. I mean, he's just this cop walking into the party with no gun, Mike. So I don't know. I mean, it's silly, but I'll tell you, he presents as a positive, accomplished, brave, caring, sympathetic guy in this film. It's, I don't know how many films are presenting, and maybe we're bleeding into the next point, but how many films are presenting the African-American hero, the person you're rooting for in the story? How many of them are presenting him like this?
Well, that's really what blaxploitation films were kind of all about, and that's how that genre really grew. Kind of turning the, because if you watch some of those old Dirty Harry movies, for example, the African American guy was going to be the pimp, right? Or Starsky and Hutch, you had Huggy Bear. So blaxploitation as a genre really came about as a way of really turning those those things on their heads a bit. And I think that's why actually Quentin Tarantino is such a big fan of it. And he pays homage to, that genre quite a bit in his films. But yeah, you're right. I mean, he does present as a positive character. And anybody, and honestly, I think Weathers does a good job in this movie. It's what he's given. He does a good job with what he
does.
You root for him. I totally root for him. It's just all in all, the movie looks like it was written like, I'm thinking like a bunch of guys got like baked one night and and just wrote this down on like the back of a cocktail napkin or something like that. But like there were some decisions that were made in this movie that I don't think I would make. But go ahead, Jim.
I think they wanted to create an African American action hero for the ages. A black Dirty Harry, a black. Remember Stallone's movie Cobra?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, like a black Marion Cobretti, but somebody funny and charming who didn't take himself too seriously, had been through the ringer with his ex-wife. There's that scene where he's talking to Vanity in the car about his wife, how she left him after he got disciplined for the police brutality charge, and he goes through this whole thing, and but he's a he's supposed to be a new kind of action hero for the ages, and obviously this was the last time Action Jackson ever made an appearance in the film, but that's what they were going for. I mean, Carl Weathers was going to be an African American version of a Stallone, of a hero cop movie protagonist, and you could blame Hollywood, you could blame society for being unwilling to accept a black hero like this, or you could just say this was a big turd and the movie was bad, and Jim, it's not going to go any further because of that. This is not a social experiment. It's not going to go any further.
I think it was more the fact that it was a big turd. I think Weathers was good. I think the action sequences, while completely unbelievable, look, they take place in an 80s action movie. I wouldn't necessarily say RoboCop was believable either.
No.
But I think it really just, the movie made no sense. And I think there were some business dealings that happened afterwards. I think this was done by Lorimar. It was owned by Sony.
Oh, yeah.
And then it was sold to Warner, and then Warner decided we're not going to go forward. But what I think really happened here, Jim, because there have been other action movies that went into a franchise that just weren't very good and made it. But I think it really was a cultural change. So, this movie was done in 88, and I'm thinking, by this point, we're just past the peak of big action flicks. Schwarzenegger had peaked during this time. But, as the 90s came around, the cultural taste had changed quite a bit. The genre just kind of died. And it reminds me a bit of, what was happening musically at the time. 88, 87, I'd say, is the peak of what many people call hair metal, right? Your Bon Jovis, your Def Leppards, your Poisons, that's kind of at the peak in 87. And then once that peak hits, you're kind of on the downswing. So by the time the 90s roll around and grunge is big, those bands are gone. And I think the same thing happened with sort of the 80s action movie. The taste change, and all of a sudden there's just people aren't interested in those films anymore. That's my take.
I agree with you 100%. I think it's and the corollary between hair metal and musical tastes and cinema tastes is a very good one. I mean, if you were a band with a few guys with a blonde lead singer with the long hair, and every song had like a 35 to 40 second guitar solo in it, that was the recipe. That's all it was. And in the action genre, you needed a muscular lead character with the six-pack abs and the delts and the whole thing, who could do some tricks, snap some necks, take some knives out of the hands and throw grenades. And that was a winner. That's all it was. That was the secret. That was the special sauce. And people just lost their taste for it. It's like they demanded more. I don't know. You and I have talked on this podcast before about how we got darker, we got more sophisticated, we got more cynical. I think that's true. And then, you had other cultural phenomenon happening, like in film, where you had the rise of the goddamn romantic comedy, which started with Harry Met Sally. That was like the flagship, and that was 89, right? So that's the first That's when the ships left the shore with that Harry Sally thing.
You really have a disdain for When Harry Met Sally. I think it's a fine film.
I just what it did was it started this cascade effect of romantic comedies, and ultimately where romantic comedies took society was, the guy was the bumbling idiot. The guy was the dummy who had to jump through all kinds of hoops in order to eventually win my lady at the end of the film. That's what he had to do. And it meant changing his life. It meant changing his direction, his focus, the whole friggin' thing. He was broken. He was broken. He was incomplete. He needed help. And she was the missing piece of that puzzle, but he had to do certain things to get her. That was the whole fucking thing with those movies. And, I have a problem. Give me the flip over the cab. I got to catch a cab.
I see the hair getting curly, Jim. I see the anger. I'm gonna hold off on your rant. I do want you to rant. I don't want you to rant just yet. Because where you were going was, hey, all you needed for the band was the blonde lead singer, the 30-second guitar solo. And then you were saying, okay, all you need for the 80s action movie is the muscular guy, whatever. But I did identify 7 80s tropes that were in this movie, and I just wanted to discuss them a little bit. The first one being henchmen. This movie, certainly from the opening scene of this movie, the Invisible Men henchmen, came out of nowhere, and they wreaked havoc, and they played little parts throughout the rest of the film. Now, I liken these henchmen, when I saw them, when they first appeared on screen, they were like ninjas, right? They were ninjas. But, when you get up close and personal with them, they all had like the long hair.
Yeah.
They reminded me of like the band Dokken on the Under Lock and Key album cover. So you had your long-haired henchmen. Definitely an 80s trope. What do you think?
100%. Yeah, it's a very good observation. And I think when I see these guys, they're either the B team or the C team. These are the guys who did not get picked as the henchmen in the Die Hard. That Hans didn't pick them. Hans sent these guys back. Sorry, I'm going to take the others. You guys, go work on something else. And they became the Action Jackson henchmen, invading the yacht or whatever the hell they did in the film.
I mean, they may be the B team, but remarkably effective. I mean, nowhere they kill those 2 people in the beginning of the film. Then they get onto the yacht, and then their only point of demise was when they have to deal with good old Action Jackson.
And the demise happened because none of them were smart enough to just pull out one of those expensive weapons and just blow him in the head and shoot him in the head.
Well, that leads us to a second 80s trope, which is giving away your master plan.
Yeah.
And then leaving before you see, that the guy you're after, in this case, our good friend Dellaplane, right, tells Action Jackson exactly what's about to happen, gives away the master plan. Then he leaves before actually observing Action Jackson being killed, of course, leading to the point where Action Jackson kind of turns things around. But so this idea of giving up your master plan is also something that was very big in 80s movies as well.
Absolutely huge. By the way, it's a little concerning because Dellaplane's this rich white guy, and I don't know, he's got Action tied up in chains. I don't know. It was a little unsettling with the thing.
Yeah, well, there could be a moment there that viewed through a 2020 lens.
Oh God, maybe we would have shied away from that one.
But actually, interesting in that part of the movie, though. Do you remember what happens? Like how he gets out of that jam? Because he was about to die. So how does he get out of the jam?
He's about to die because the henchmen turned on that flame, or whatever that high intensity flame was. I don't know what it was, but he's about to burn him. I guess burn him to death because that's an efficient thing to do. Anyway, out of nowhere from the sky, the very large, bald-headed black guy swoops down from overhead and says some corny line on the way down and starts punching people in the face.
Well, here's the thing, and that is Vanity's or what was her name? Sydney. Sydney was
Sydney's bodyguard. Is that what it
her
was?
bodyguard. But here's my big question. Why does Sydney need a bodyguard? She is a heroin addicted lounge singer. She's not Whitney Houston, so she's not crack addicted. But she's a heroin addicted lounge singer.
Yeah.
Why does she have a bodyguard?
I can't figure any of that. I have no idea what's happening with her. I mean, she's like a side piece for Dellaplane. Isn't that right? I mean, he's just like he's got her on the side, but instead of sleeping with her, like he shoots her up with heroin and then she falls asleep. He's a weird guy, this guy. Like it's just some weird like fetishes, maybe. I don't know.
Present, he gives her a reusable needle. Like, what the
Yeah. I don't know.
together for a little while. Let me give you this reusable needle you can use to shoot up because the disposable ones are not classy enough for you.
It's bizarre. It's really strange. But that's definitely a trope that's used. Here's the plan.
But the other thing I noticed here, and then I'll move on to my next trope, but is if you look at Craig T. Nelson's hair,
Yeah.
it reminds me of like what Joe Biden's trying to go for.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think it was a Biden like 20 years ago when he had the plugs for the first time, and they looked a little bit more fulsome than they do now. Mike, I don't want to step on the rest of the trope list that you have, but can we talk about the plan for a minute? Like what was involved in this plan?
Talk about the plan.
I don't understand any of this. So Dellaplane is the head of a car company. He sells cars.
Yeah, hot and hottest.
Hottest, and he hatches this plan to kill some high-level auto union leaders. Because why? Because that's going to help his car business. Maybe I'm not sure.
No, he's got a secret behind the throne plan. So he wants to be behind the seat of power. So he wants to be the guy whispering into, let's say, the president's ear. And he's using this group of assassins to murder anyone who's uncooperative in the union. So he doesn't want to be the head of the union, but he wants to be able to whisper into the union because unions get presidents elected. And so that's his ultimate goal, is to have some kind of influence in politics.
Yeah, and to get that influence, he has to kill these men in this union. I don't understand it. And like I told you, we're eating through the donut. Okay, kind of makes sense. There's a conspiracy, and we get to that part of the donut. And why is he so angry at Action Jackson? He's angry at him because of what he did to his son. He sent his son to jail because his son was a sex predator. We don't have all the details, but we know that Action broke his arm. And Dellaplane clearly resents Jackson for sending him to jail. And we assume that Dellaplane was able to somehow concoct the excessive force argument, although the guy did go to jail. So clearly there was a value, there was a legitimate arrest that was made. But Dellaplane gets Action Jackson demoted. That was the first part of the revenge plan. Let's get him demoted and send him back to the sergeant rank with no gun. And now he wants to kill Jackson because Jackson messed up his son's life. But then as Jackson's tied up in the chains, Dellaplane says, and unfortunately, it may get to the point where I have to kill my son. A stabbing in the shower. You know how those things happen all the time. That's what he says, Mike. So now he's going to kill his son. So tell me, why are we so obsessed with Jackson when your own son, and it doesn't make any sense why he would kill his son. His son's in jail. Like, how's his son getting in the way of anything?
The only thing I can think of, again, not clearly presented in the film, but the only thing I could think of is like when he does rise to power, his son's police record might be a liability, kind of like a Beau Biden type thing. I mean, not that it was a problem with Joe.
Yeah.
That's all I can think of there is, maybe he's got to cut bait with Junior,
Maybe you're right. We know he killed his ex-wife because of money. He had to kill Sharon Stone because she started asking too many questions. It's just very confusing. And
here's what I want to, he kills Sharon Stone. I promise I'll get to the next trope.
Yeah.
kills Sharon Stone in broad daylight in his house. He just shoots her on the bed. Um, and then he gets people to drag the body to Action Jackson's apartment where it's found. How does that happen and no one notices? Like, how do you pull that off?
Mike, I have no idea. I have no idea, but he wanted to frame Action for her murder and then dress up another black guy in the same clothes as Action Jackson and have that guy be the assassin who kills another auto chief.
Yeah, who kills the guy at the party at the end. And then they're going to find Action Jackson's burnt to a crisp body, like behind a car, his getaway car, because his plan was foiled. I mean, there were more holes in this guy's plans than in one of my novels. I mean, it's bad. It's just bad.
It's just so screwy.
So
screwy.
Well, let's talk about another 80s trope, and this is one that I know is near and dear to your heart, Jim, karate. There are karate sequences in this movie. The first time we see it, Craig T. Nelson is beating the crap out of a guy who looks like he should be beating the crap out of him, doing some martial arts. But karate, very big in the 80s, no doubt, right, Jim?
Huge, absolutely. One is reminded of the scene in the last Roger Moore James Bond film, which was A View to a Kill, where Christopher Walken is training in karate with Grace Jones. And he's dressed in a full black gi with a black belt, and he is engaged in a sparring exercise with Grace Jones. Karate and martial arts in general were definitely part of the ambiance. I mean, they were like, I don't know, again, stupid metaphor, like wallpaper. They're in the backdrop of almost every action film in some capacity. You know, Schwarzenegger was never doing like flying kicks or anything like that. That wasn't his jam. But he would do an arm break. He would, smash people with a back fist and that kind of thing. Stallone was a little bit more of a karate guy in certain instances. If you ever saw the movie The Specialist, I think Sharon Stone might have been in that thing too. There's a scene where Stallone is actually practicing what looks like Tai Chi or something in a particular scene. So martial arts were always, I mean, the Hollywood interpretation of martial arts was very prominent in this genre of film. Absolutely, no doubt.
Yeah, and just that time period. I mean, it was great, and Resurrected, I believe Resurrected well in the Matrix movies. I thought those were
yes,
but definitely made a comeback then. And those, I'm sure, in your own, personal life there, Jim, having seen the influence of martial arts in movies, you started taking them yourself when you met good old Bud Whitney.
Of course. Yeah. When I was 14 or 15, and I went into a karate dojo, such as it was, for the first time in downtown Stanford, like downtown across the tracks, Stanford, and started studying Taekwondo, which is a Korean martial art focused heavily on kicking and things of that nature. Not overly practical, but what the hell? It was a lot of fun.
Hoon-ri. Also, you used that quite effectively after you failed your driver's test for the first time, and I believe you kicked your closet door off track, if I'm not mistaken.
I was a little upset with my performance on the driver's exam, and there might have been a kick.
Unfortunately, it was the written part, not even the practical. But let's not. That
Jesus.
It does lead us to our next trope.
Yeah.
Trope is cars.
Oh.
Cars. So 80s movies, you had to have the cool cars, and you definitely. I mean, Dellaplane. Basically, he created the Pontiac Fiero in this movie. I mean, that's basically what the car was, if I'm not mistaken. Wasn't a Firebird, it was the Fiero. Yeah. But cars, very big trope for 80s movies of this nature.
Absolutely. Needed to have the hot car, the hot sports car. One remembers Commando with Schwarzenegger when Sully is one of the henchmen for the Sandinistan. Let's not even go there because it's too much. But there's like a Porsche that Schwarzenegger picks up and throws. And in this movie, it's this red sports car that's been developed by Dellaplane. And I mean, there, you know, so Mike, beyond like, so under the broad category of cars, you have to say car chases, you know, scenes where there's a high speed chase or somebody's chasing a car. What made Action Jackson a little unique for car chases was that he actually chased a car on foot.
He
To your
did.
point,
Yes.
he was able to run fast enough using his Action Jackson speed and catch up to this cab. And he must have been, we say he's track star. I think you're right, but it's probably track and field because he clearly had high jumping skills. Because at one point the taxi cab is coming right at him and he leaps over the cab, does a full somersault, lands on his feet on the other side of the cab, which is the scene that our esteemed older brother first called out in 1988 and just shook his head and said, "This is just, I can't do this. I can't do it."
Yeah, I mean, I never like to go against anything Greg says, but part of the fun of the movie, though, watching
Oh yeah,
over
yeah.
I mean, you have to suspend your disbelief when you go into a movie like this.
But there is so we can suspend disbelief and
Yeah.
we can jump over the cab and do a flip.
Uh-huh.
There's one scene though that involves a car
Yes.
and it's very confusing because just, you know, I watch a lot of videos just because they come up in my YouTube feed of stuff that I'm interested in on, you know, space and how dark energy is accelerating the size of the universe, all this stuff. Like, I never, you listen to that weirdo DeGrasse Tyson with the child porn and the thing on his computer. I don't know if he does, but
that is a baseless accusation.
it is. But look, he's got the colored shirts with the swirlies. I mean, come on, this is my cosmic shirt. Take a look at it.
Will not talk bad about Neil deGrasse Tyson.
I actually do. I don't mean to disparage him. He's a very good guy, and he actually explains physics in a way that I sort of understand, not really. But you know, you learn all kinds of weird things about how the universe operates and how the laws of physics begin to break down the closer you get to the source of the Big Bang or whatever, you know, all this stuff. But this movie was a lesson in the laws of physics breaking down because Action Jackson at this party where he was going to be framed for assassinating the union auto worker leader or whatever, Action Jackson takes this red sports car developed by Dellaplane and drives it into Dellaplane's house, into the entryway of the house, up a flight of stairs, makes a right-hand turn around the corner, and ultimately ends up in Dellaplane's bedroom in the car. Now, how enormous must this house have been? Like, you go into an auto dealership, Mike, and you're always like, how the hell do they get these cars in here? Like, I'm on the 4th floor of this dealership, and there's a full-size car next to Johnny's desk who's like filling out the paperwork for me. How's this car here? Well, Action Jackson may have solved that mystery because he drove this car up a flight of stairs into bedrooms, Mike.
Well, you know, it's not only does it go up the flight, it's wide enough. The staircase is wide enough for a car.
Yeah.
But then it makes a 90-degree turn into a bedroom.
I mean, you know, it's pretty amazing stuff. It's pretty amazing stuff. But, I mean, I don't know.
Moving on from cars, another one, 80s tropes, of course. One-liners, Jim. This movie has a number of them.
Oh my God. Does it ever? Does it ever? And I know we're not at blaxploitation yet, but I mean, are any of these lines realistic? Would a black cop from Detroit be using these lines? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. But
He's Harvard educated. But I guess the bigger question is, would anyone who went to Harvard ever look at somebody while they're holding a grenade launcher and say, barbecue, how do you like your ribs? And then blow the guy up. I mean, is that something that would be said? But again, you know, suspending disbelief. A lot of one-liners in this, other movies too. I mean, I remember when you and I were growing up, you, me, and our friend Chris, we'd always wind up seeing action movies together.
Yeah.
And then I do remember oftentimes going to a diner or something afterwards and just kind of trying to write down all the ones we could remember, uh,
Yeah.
just to just to keep a record of it. Of course, days well before we had access to the World Wide Web or internet or anything like that. Um, but this movie certainly not short of one-liners.
No, there are a lot of one-liners. There's a lot of campy, lines. There's a lot of played out sequences. When Action Jackson is again tied up in the chains, and Delaplane talks about what he's going to do to Vanity, and by this point, Action Jackson is absolutely emotionally committed to Vanity. I mean, this is going to be his girlfriend now going forward. And there's the part where Delaplane says to Action, like, I'm gonna kill her, but not before I bleep her one more time. And then at that point, Carl Weathers grabs at the chain with his arm, and his bicep flexes, and it's like he's trying to get out of the chains to go at Delaplane. Jesus, I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. But look, again, you're not going to this movie because it's going to win an award. You're going to have a good time and maybe laugh at some of its absurdity, and maybe get caught up in some of the action sequences. If that's what the movie was designed to do, I don't think it did a terrible job at it.
Well, you said you don't go to this movie and it's not going to win an award, but this movie actually was nominated for an award. It was nominated for a Razzie Award. Worst actress for Vanity.
Is that right?
It was, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about Vanity, and that leads us to our next 80s trope here, gratuitous nudity.
Yeah.
Gratuitous nudity. There are a couple of scenes in here that just really did not do anything to move the movie forward. Number one, in the beginning, I believe you see Vanity, right? Maybe it was when he was about to shoot her up for the first time, when he gives her the magical needle as a gift. She's topless for some reason.
Yeah.
It's not a love scene. She just happens to be topless, and you see some big silver dollars there.
Yeah.
Dinner plates. But and then Sharon Stone in the shower, you see a glimpse of her backside. Again, does nothing to move the movie forward, but just happens to be an 80s trope. There was always the gratuitous nude shot in these movies.
Well, and here's why, because the only way that you're going to see Vanity's front side, and the only way you're going to see Sharon Stone's backside, is to buy a movie ticket in 1988 and go inside the theater. You can't watch it on YouTube. Nobody's going to take a recording of the movie and widely distribute it through the internet. The internet didn't exist. I mean, at least in the current, way it does now. So these scenes were specifically designed to generate buzz and to get the rear ends in the seats in the theaters. That's why they were part of the film.
Rears for rears.
Yeah, exactly.
Last trope I have to talk about here, Jim, also deals with vanity, but drugs. Drugs also a big 80s trope on TV, and Miami Vice kind of revolved around it, but
absolutely
also in movies as well. And of course, you had the heroin, which apparently is very easy to kick in this movie, but drugs and 80s trope.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually a very interesting kind of a dichotomy here that's drawn. So you have the lead character in this film, Action Jackson, African American, absolute disdain for drugs, absolute disdain for anybody doing anything like that. I know we're going to talk about blaxploitation in a minute. I wonder if an anti-drug, Ronald Reagan superhero action star is going to resonate in certain communities these days, or whether in the white community is he going to resonate, or is everybody just so libertine perhaps in some of their attitudes now that you hear somebody claim that drugs are bad and they're bad for your body and they're bad for your future. That's just going to fall on deaf ears nowadays. That's interesting. I don't know. We seem to be more drawn to the heroes that maybe have some dependency issues, and they're kind of falling into their insobriety, but then they have to kind of muster up enough clarity of mind and strength and fortitude to go accomplish what they need to in the movie. We seem to be more drawn to those characters, maybe because we relate to them more. Maybe because we're not going to be the plastic Bananarama superstar like Action Jackson was. I don't know. It's interesting how that concept changes. But yeah, drugs a big trope in the film.
Yeah. Well, you've been talking about blaxploitation a little bit here, Jim. I mean, certainly, and we did kind of hint about it and talk about it before. This film is considered a blaxploitation film. It is probably one of the last of that era to have been made. It's certainly a genre that was much more popular in the 70s than it was in the 80s. And then it did make a little bit of a comeback in present day. But for those who don't know, blaxploitation is a type of film that kind of puts in this situation or in this example, kind of an African American in the hero's spotlight. So you do have Carl Weathers, of course, as Action Jackson, as the hero here, rather than the sidekick, rather than the villain, rather than the victim of some kind of brutality. He's the hero. But the other thing that these movies have in common is that they do play up stereotypes quite a bit, and that's actually a common criticism of these movies. So it's kind of playing up stereotypes. So I just wanted to kind of just put that out there before we kind of continue the discussion.
Okay. I mean, are the people, because I'm not as familiar with this. I mean, I have a general sense of it. We're just waiting for the doctors to call. And then we'll go. They're going to call me. They're going to call me. I do. Here. So just so I'm understanding it in a more modern context. Remember Tarantino's film Jackie Brown?
Yes.
Remember Pulp Fiction and Samuel Jackson's character? Is that blaxploitation? Is that kind of what you're
nods? Those are kind of nods to blaxploitation. Yes.
Okay. All right.
I'm not a film historian. Like I don't mean to come across as somebody who's all not knowledgeable about this stuff.
No, it's just where I get a little bit tied up with the term is it's a derivative, or I don't know if it's a derivative or it's another word for exploitation. So, or it reeks of exploitation. So, are the people who are categorizing these films as blaxploitation, are they claiming that we're exploiting Black people in the film, that we're taking advantage of them somehow? What's the?
I don't know that it's that negative. I think it's more about kind of exploiting the stereotype somewhat.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think that it's about sort of taking advantage of any racial group whatsoever.
Okay, so Mike, just based on where we are in 1988, so you have a movie like Action Jackson. You had Roots. Remember, that was 10 years before, so it was a while before that. But then go to the 90s, where the desire was not to dress up the African American community in a film like Action Jackson and make them heroes and give them law degrees and have them save the day. You went from a movie like an Action Jackson to a New Jack City, where now you're trying to presumably present a more realistic portrayal of what African American life is like, at least in a particular community. And I don't think New Jack City would be considered blaxploitation, as I'm understanding the term.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, that's more of like realism, I want to say.
Okay.
You're trying to, it's almost, I don't want to say biopic, because I don't believe it was. I mean, I'm sure it was based on true elements, but I don't think, there was a Nino Brown. I don't know that there was a G Money. But no, I mean that's sort of so. Yeah, you're right. I mean they are kind of different in that regard. This, movies like New Jack City, or even more kind of present day, straight out of Compton. That's really meant to be more of a biopic, and present a real picture of life in so New Jack. I'm sorry, Straight Outta Compton would have been, kind of more about kind of what was going on and that area of California and the rise of kind of the West Coast rap scene, hip hop scene. I always called it rap, but
What's an interesting dynamic with this? I remember watching Action Jackson, and because we said at the beginning of this episode that I had kind of a hero. I loved the hero action movies. That was my jam, and I loved, thinking of myself potentially in that role, and would I have the courage and the wherewithal to jump and flip over taxi cabs, for example. Those are all important things to consider in one's life. But I didn't view when I saw Action Jackson, I viewed it as, good guy versus a bad guy, an evil, maniacal, perhaps another trope is the devious, like narcissistic madman villain, right? Out of James Bond. That was Dellaplane. That was Craig T. Nelson, who I always, for some reason, get confused with Daniel J. Travanti, and I guess that's because they have three words in their name. Daniel J. Travanti.
Was he the guy in the Adam Walsh movie that he played Adam Walsh's dad, right?
Yeah, he did. He played Walsh's father. Yeah. He played Walsh's father. So that was Daniel J. Travanti. But I didn't view. I wasn't imagining it didn't really dawn on me that this was a black hero defeating like a white villain. I just saw it in terms of Carl Weathers is like everything I want to be. He's smart, he's athletic, he's brave, he does the right thing even though it's not the easy thing. All the stuff, right? And he fights Craig T. Nelson, and he's able to defeat him at the end. And that's a great thing. I wonder if, like, the African Americans, though, like, who are seeing this film, are they viewing it from a ethnic perspective? Are they imbuing or whatever the verb is, Action Jackson as a representation of them as he's going out and doing all those great things? Are they making that connection? Do they have those aspirations? Nobody answer this question, but
we need a time machine to go back to '88 and do some focus groups with people after they leave the movie theater.
Yes, I agree. That would be a problem. I don't know. I mean, Jesus, I'm like, who knows? Honestly.
Here's as we kind of wrap up here, Jim.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the 93 minutes or whatever of this film. I mean, my wife had fallen asleep, as she does most nights on the couch, leaving me to finish an episode of Law and Order SVU and then turn on whatever I'd like to watch. So I turn on Action Jackson. I did not think it was time wasted. I had a lot of fun watching this movie. It brought back a lot of memories of a fun time period of my life. Yes, the movie is absolutely ridiculous, but it's a fun movie to watch, and it clearly led to some fun discussion here.
Absolutely. We talked more about the film in this episode maybe than we're used to discussing. And usually we kind of branch off on other topics. I'm a little reticent to do that, Mike, I can't make a big leap and talk about the larger, like, societal implications of Action Jackson when it comes to things like, racial intolerance, when it comes to stereotypes, when it comes to, how would a movie like this in today's highly charged environment where there's obviously a lot of racial tension out there, where the hero black cop is taking down the evil white, industrialist. How's that going to play? How's that going to be viewed? Is it going to be dismissed as ridiculous? Can you have a hero black cop in a successful film today? Remember Training Day? Remember the Denzel and the Ethan Hunt or Ethan Hawke, or whatever the hell is some bird thing? Can you have that film? Can you have the black cop, Mike? I'm asking seriously. I don't know. Can you have the black cop?
Of course. So why not? Why couldn't you? I mean, look, again, you know, you can't compare this movie to a Training Day. You know,
Yeah.
Training Day was considered more of a not an action movie. It was more of a drama.
Mm.
And it was also, you know, part of that rise of the anti-hero. You know, and there was a little bit of realism in there as well. You know, let's show the newbie what's what. Um, you know. So I don't think you can compare that. I don't think you can. I really don't.
Look. I like the fact that this was a GI Joe doll character. This
Yes.
is Action Jackson. He was honest. He was brave. He was kind. He didn't have like a dark side. He wasn't a complicated character. Um, and you know what? I get it. It's passe. It's kind of silly. It's not really reflective of the postmodern era. Um, it's kind of dumb, right? But I think if we had a little bit more of that kind of purity of heart, that bravery, that courage, that spirit, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Well, you know, it's like what you said about Megaforce. You know, you got a very clear good guy, a very, maybe not a clear bad guy, because I still don't know what Megaforce was about.
No,
Um,
I just remember the Indian selling the gas at the station. Jesus Christ.
oh boy,
And fireworks, right? And you sell the fireworks.
fireworks, the flying motorcycle. Oh my God, what a fucking piece of shit that was. Action Jackson, not a piece of shit.
No.
It's one movie again, and I mean, it's the end of an era type movie.
Absolutely.
The shame. Honestly, it's a shame Carl Weathers' career wasn't bigger than it has been, because I do think he's fantastic.
I love him. I'm a huge Carl Weathers fan. He's fantastic. I always liked him, and I'm glad he's in The Mandalorian, even if it's a small role. I actually bought the damn Disney Plus just so I could watch Mandalorian, and I only really care to watch Mandalorian because Carl Weathers is in it. Honestly, like I don't have any attachment to anything else in that show. But you know, so there you go.
Too
Love
bad
him.
it wasn't called the Hondalorian, because then they call him Hondo instead of Mando. Of course, referencing Hondo McClane, your favorite character from the TV show Mask. Not to be confused with the movie Mask, with you
Going
know,
along with the trope that there always has to be a black hero or character in the ensemble. But,
Hondo McClane.
yeah.
Hondo McClane. All right, Jim. Well, this has been fun.
Yes.
This has been fun. We don't know what movie we're gonna do.
No.
We will give it a thought, and hopefully, we'll have a third chair with us to keep the conversation going.
Well, I'm still down in the heart of Dixie here, so we'll see when I get back up to Connecticut. Yeah, there's a big building across the way with it's like the whole building is like a Trump headquarters, and there's still the banners up. Oh man, it's all down here. It's crazy town. Like you walk around with a mask on, and they all look at you like, when they got the mask on, you know, they walk around. I mean, it's wounds, man. I mean, I'm from the state. I love the state. Yeah, I'm a Republican in the whole thing, but I mean, this is a crazy bananas down here.
Florida is it really is a different world. You know, it really is a different world. But you know, we're going to go down that rabbit hole. I need to prevent us from doing so.
Yeah.
Jim, this has been fun, and then we'll be back next time.
Thank you, baby.